Jack Harper gazed out the car window, watching the empty fields roll by under the overcast sky. The town of Quiet Falls, named ironically for its murky history, lay nestled between stretches of farmland, dense woods, and a forgotten lake that most maps no longer marked. It was the kind of place where rumors were passed like heirlooms, growing more tangled and dark with each generation. He didn't come here by choice. His editor at the Chronicle, always on the lookout for stories with soul, had assigned him to cover the 50th anniversary of the old Malory Mansion, an abandoned, half-rotted estate that locals whispered about but rarely approached. The task seemed like a throwaway, something fit for a history blog rather than a major paper, but the mansion's lore was thick with ghost stories, unexplained deaths, and strange disappearances. The more Jack read, the more he felt the tug of something dark, urging him to dig deeper. As he pulled up to the town's only gas station, he noticed the locals, quiet and observant, peeking out from their windows and muttering among themselves. He was used to such looks. City folk always had a way of stirring small towns. But the way they glanced at him, almost as if warning him to turn around, made his stomach clench with unexpected unease. Inside the gas station, Jack approached the elderly man behind the counter, his voice steady, hoping for some local insight. "Hi there, I'm Jack Harper, here to cover a story on the old Malory Mansion." The man's hand stilled over the cash register, his fingers frozen. He looked up with narrowed eyes. "You're not from around here, are you?" Jack forced a smile. "Just visiting for the article." The man shook his head slowly, a shadow crossing his face. "That house, in a place for visitors or nosy reporters. It's better left alone." Jack felt his pulse quicken. "I've heard stories about people seeing strange things, even deaths." The old man nodded gravely. "More than a few have gone up there and never come back. The place got shut down years ago after the last incident. A local girl went missing in that house, and when they finally found her, well, they say she'd lost her mind. Talking about shadows that whispered her name. Only lasted a week after that." Jack's fingers tapped nervously against the counter, his journalist instincts flaring. A story that mysterious was bound to catch attention. "Do you know where I can find any information on these stories? Police records or something?" The old man laughed dryly, his eyes flickering with something dark. "Police stopped caring about that place years ago. But if you really want answers, you might talk to Sarah Whitman. She's one of the only ones left who's seen the inside of that house and come back." The sun dipped lower as Jack drove to the edge of town, following the old man's directions. Sarah Whitman's cottage stood at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by towering pines. When he knocked, he heard shuffling inside, followed by the sound of the door unlocking. The woman who opened it was in her 70s, her face worn, but her eyes sharp with something akin to fear. "You're here about Malory Mansion," she said, more a statement than a question. Her voice was quiet, as if she feared something beyond the walls might hear. Jack nodded. "I want to know what happened there. Anything you can tell me." Sarah looked over his shoulder, scanning the tree line. Then, she gestured for him to step inside. "There's only one story that matters. They say the house, it keeps you. Once you enter, it's like stepping into a place where time and reality don't work the same way." He felt a chill. "But why?" She sighed, sitting down in an old armchair. "No one knows why, but people who go in there, they change. I still hear them, sometimes at night, whispering my name like they're just behind my shoulder. And I swear, shadows move in that house in ways they shouldn't." "Have you seen them?" he asked, feeling a knot of dread in his chest. Her voice lowered to a whisper. "Not seen, felt. And if you're smart, young man, you'll leave that house alone." Jack left Sarah's house with her words lingering in his mind. Despite her warnings, he couldn't shake the pull of the story, the chance to uncover something that had haunted this town for decades. By the time he reached the mansion, the last traces of daylight were fading, casting the towering silhouette in shades of deep, bruised purple. The air around it seemed colder, the trees standing unnaturally still. He hesitated as he reached the rusted iron gate. It swung open at his touch with a groan, as if welcoming him with an eerie invitation. The path leading up to the mansion was overgrown, weeds clawing at his shoes as he walked. Jack took a deep breath, steeling himself as he stepped through the front door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The wallpaper peeled like dying skin, and the silence was almost unbearable, broken only by the creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. He took out his flashlight and began exploring the entryway, casting a beam of light over the dust-covered furniture and cracked portraits on the walls. He felt as if he was being watched, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling as shadows seemed to deepen with each step. A movement caught his eye, a shadow, darting quickly across the edge of his vision. He spun around, but the hallway was empty. Only his echoing breaths filled the space. He moved deeper into the house, his footsteps sounding louder than they should in the quiet. Every room he entered seemed steeped in a strange kind of darkness, as though the light itself was reluctant to touch certain spaces. In one corner of the living room, he noticed a large floor-to-ceiling mirror, its glass clouded and faintly distorted, reflecting the room in strange angles. Jack couldn't resist a closer look. As he peered into the mirror, he saw something, an outline in the reflection that shouldn't have been there. It was a faint figure, standing just behind him, barely visible in the murky glass. His heart pounded as he spun around, but the room was empty. He looked back at the mirror, only to find that the figure was gone. His pulse was still racing as he moved into what looked like an old study. Dusty books lined the shelves, and a large mahogany desk sat at the center, littered with papers that had yellowed over time. Among the papers, one journal stood out, its leather cover cracked but intact. Jack opened it carefully, reading the scrawled handwriting inside. It belonged to someone named Dr. Evelyn Wainwright, dated back to the 1940s. The entries were cryptic, detailing various experiments conducted on patients under the guise of psychological observation. The more he read, the more Jack felt a sickening realization. The mansion had been used as a kind of asylum, and Dr. Wainwright's experiments were anything but ethical. One entry in particular made him freeze. October 13th, 1943. The shadows are different here. They move. They seem to absorb the things that people want to forget, the memories they wish to bury. My patients hear voices, see figures, and most importantly, they never forget. They are haunted by the shadows even after they leave this house. But it is my greatest success, proof that memory can be weaponized. Jack's skin crawled as he scanned the following entries, each more disturbing than the last. Patients subjected to forced isolation, sensory deprivation, even chemical injections, all designed to force them to confront their deepest fears. He looked around, feeling suddenly exposed. The air had grown heavier, colder. He took a deep breath and continued reading, but a sound cut through the silence, a faint, whispering voice. The voice was barely audible, like a murmur carried on the wind. Jack turned his flashlight toward the hallway, where he thought he saw something move, just a flicker, but enough to make his heart race. He tried to shake off the feeling of dread creeping over him, reminding himself that it was an old house, probably filled with drafts and strange acoustics. But as he moved down the hall, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they seemed to be calling his name. Jack! He froze. The voice was unmistakable, coming from just ahead. Swallowing hard, he edged forward, his hand shaking as he raised the flashlight. At the end of the hall was a closed door, its paint peeling. The whispering stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Jack reached out, pushing the door open. Inside was a small room, empty except for a single chair facing a broken window. As he stepped inside, he felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees. The air grew heavy, pressing in on him. He turned to leave, but stopped short. In the mirror across the room, he saw the figure again, closer this time. The face was indistinct, as if smudged, but its eyes were sharp, glaring at him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. His hand slipped on the doorknob as he tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. The figure in the mirror stepped forward, closer to the glass, until its breath fogged up the surface. Then, in a voice that sounded all too familiar, it whispered, "You shouldn't have come here, Jack." Jack finally managed to yank the door open, stumbling back into the hallway. He tried to steady his breathing, but his heart was racing, his mind filled with a growing sense of dread. He had to get out of this place. But as he retraced his steps, the mansion seemed to twist and change, hallways stretching longer, rooms shifting as if they were alive. Desperate, he ran, trying to find the front door. But no matter which direction he turned, he only found himself deeper within the mansion's labyrinthine corridors. Finally, he stumbled into a room he didn't remember entering before. The walls were covered in the same faded wallpaper, but this room felt wrong, as if it held the weight of every memory, every fear that had ever passed through it. And there, standing in the center of the room, was Dr. Evelyn Wainwright, or rather, what remained of her. Her face was hollow, her eyes dark pits that seemed to swallow the light. She moved slowly, her gaze fixed on Jack, a sickly smile stretching across her face. "You wanted answers, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice echoing around him. "This house, it's a vessel, a keeper of memories, of shadows. It has taken everyone who dared to uncover its secrets. And now it will take you too." Jack stumbled back, his mind racing. He tried to speak, to plead, but the words died in his throat. The shadows in the room began to shift, closing in around him, their whispers growing louder, filling his mind until he felt as though he might go mad. As the darkness enveloped him, he felt himself slipping, memories flashing before him. The house was pulling him in, making him a part of its endless, twisted history. The last thing he saw was Dr. Wainwright's face, her smile widening as the shadows consumed him. Weeks passed, and Jack Harper was never seen again. The townsfolk shook their heads, murmuring about another one lost to the mansion. Only Sarah Whitman remained silent, her gaze distant, haunted by memories of the shadows that never left her. Every so often, a figure could be seen in the window of the Malory Mansion, a shadowy outline, staring out as if waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone else to step inside and join its dark history.